Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending some time this afternoon with us. My name is Bernard Nasuli, COO at iEmergent, and we are just getting ready. We're going to give it another 30 seconds for people to file in, and we're going to get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm back as well. Thank you, Bernard, for getting things started.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's give it another 15 seconds or so as people trickle in, and then we will get going. All right. So let's go. So this is from Gaps to Growth, episode 3. This is called Setting Goals and Right Sizing Resources. So, what is the purpose of today's session? Well, along with me, Bernard Nasuli, and our CEO, Laird Nasuli, we're going to figure out that, hey, once lenders identify where there's opportunity in any of their market, where there's untapped mortgage demand, then the next challenge is kind of deciding where to compete, how aggressively to pursue the opportunity, and what level of resources are justified to capture this opportunity. So today's session is about moving from insight to execution, basically comparing opportunities, setting performance-based goals, benchmarking against the market and competitors, and then finally aligning resources with the opportunities most likely to produce growth, to move the needle in your markets. So, Laird, what are you thinking today?
So I think, today when we get started, I do want to kind of revisit our roadmap and, see where we are. And I pulled it up here and, in the first part of it here, you can see, we've been talking about it and we've been focusing on identifying and quantifying where demand exists. Where is your opportunity? Whether that's borrowers, neighborhoods, market segments, individual communities, basically looking at untapped potential or missed potential. So that's one of the things we focused on last session was, when we're talking about finding opportunity and opportunity gaps, so it's really two kinds. There's new opportunities, and we can talk a little bit about goal setting and what we're talking about in that context. And then there's missed opportunities, looking at the places where you already are, seeing what demand was there that you didn't get. So in a way, it's about increasing market share and growing the pie. That's where we are right now. And as we walk through this, we focused very, like I said, very, very specifically on opportunity and quantifying it. And what's important about that was, we're going to kind of go back to certain pieces of that today, because as you remember last time, we talked about this compare markets and performance piece and what that really means. And we're going to hit that today because when we're looking at a market, it's not just about how big is the market, it's about what is the composition of the market. And to know whether you're missing opportunity, you have to do things. You have to look at what's happened. You have to look, in order to figure out, what opportunities to pursue, you have to look at what's, moving forward, what is going to happen. And we're going to pull all that together when we kind of bring together the idea of quantifying opportunity, comparing and benchmarking, and then what are the things you need to do to get to action? Because it's great to know your opportunity, quantify it, really detail it, identify it. But the hardest part of this is taking that information and doing something with it. And so, finding opportunity to acting on it. And the reason we're having this conversation right now is that at the end of the day, you don't have unlimited resources. None of us do. And so what do you do and how do you make sure that when you're pursuing and capturing opportunity, are you pursuing and capturing the right opportunity? Do you even know what it means to capture opportunity? What does that actually mean? And that's where we get into sort of the goal setting. And then 3, how do you make sure that the resources you're putting into an opportunity justify the gains from that opportunity. And that's like what we're talking about in a nutshell. You can't chase every gap. So you have to highlight the gaps that matter the most to you, which ones are meaningful, measurable, actionable, and at the end of the day, those that are really aligned with your schedule, with your strategies. And all of this that I just went to the next slide is what I just kind of talked about. And so this is where we kind of move to the whole idea about we're going to go to action. We have to do something to bridge the opportunity to action piece. And it really becomes at this point. And so as we make that shift, this is when things get complicated because, as we said, there are too many opportunities and resources are limited. It's difficult because not every gap or piece of opportunity is equally actionable. And we're going to talk about that. And then, this idea of, and when we talk today, we were going to have, okay, opportunities at the center of it all. But what do you do first? Do you set goals first? Do you right size your resources first? Do you, compare and do your priorities? The reality is you're doing all three of those things back and forth. So you might start to set a goal in a particular market, and then you will start thinking about the resources in that market, but then realize that the goal you set was too aggressive for the resources you actually have. And then when you have to figure out where to put, what market and its goals are more important than another market and its goals, it might cause you to go back and reframe the whole thing. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we're going to be focused on. And we're going to bounce around between those because the reality is when you're working on these issues, you are bouncing around between those. And so, Bernard, if you want to kind of, you work with so many different lenders. As you do that, everybody wants to grow. Here, I'm going to give you a scenario, and you tell me kind of your perspective of this. Let's use a scenario of goal setting and understanding that you have let's say an LMI, a CRA lending gap, a gap in how you're lending to LMI markets. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that's really important. One being growth, another one being regulations, a lot of different things. But in your experience, Bernard, what do you have to help lenders do first when they start to work on that problem? Because I don't think it's something that is just easy to know what to do right away. How do you guide them through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna share. I'm gonna take over just for a sec here, Laird,
Okay.
and I'm gonna present my screen. So hopefully everyone can see this map. So again, we can do this for any market. This happens to be the Atlanta market, but adjust as your specific market dictates. So the first thing is to be able to see your market, to visualize it, and it's so powerful to be able to contextualize your market in terms of, okay, this is my market, here are the geographic boundaries, and this is what it entails. So once we have that, the borders or the boundaries, if you want the foul lines, if you will, you can say, okay, this is my market and this is what I need to focus on. Now, we happen to use, I encourage our clients to use our forecast. So at this rate, we are looking at the Atlanta market by county for 2026. So we could look at this and you could say, hey, you know what, Bernard, half the year's already gone. Should we go into 2027? And we can absolutely do that. The point is that there's still a little bit more than half of the year remaining. So we stayed in 2026. But the color scheme is as follows. The blue counties represent less opportunity. The red counties represent more opportunity. So blue cold, red hot. And the concept is to be able to identify where in the market is going to be the most opportunity. Again, as Laird mentioned, resources are finite. So can you cover all of Atlanta equally well and deliver results? Chances are you're going to have to, kind of choose where to focus some of your resources depending on your specific lending strategy. Okay. But if I were to click on Gwinnett County, for example, Gwinnett by itself, we're forecasting it to be a $4.2 billion purchase market this year. Okay. So it's just massive opportunity. Fulton is a $6.5 billion market. Cobb, 3.7 billion. So just massive, massive amounts of opportunity. All right. So because these markets, these individual counties are so big, we then want to focus on the market, but at a more granular level. So now what I'm doing is I'm still focusing on Atlanta, but I'm focusing on it at the census tract level or the neighborhood level. The color scheme does not change. Blue cold, red hot. What we are doing is identifying the pockets of opportunity underneath those larger counties, right? That's the idea here. So when this is the forecast for all census tracts for everything in the geography. But now Laird asked a specific question about, for example, if we were looking at low to moderate income, if we are a lender in Atlanta and we need to increase our low to moderate income business, well, we need to then identify where the LMI census tracts are. So let's do that. So they're in
Yeah,
light green. Yeah, go ahead,
and
Laird.
Bernard, as you're doing this, just to put this in context, you know, this is what you would be showing this at a point when they would already know that there were some signals indicating that they had this problem, right? I mean, kind of
Yeah,
like this isn't discovery necessarily because they would already know that, hey, our assessment area, we know that 10% of the market is LMI and we only 5% of our market is LMI. So this would
yeah.
be where you're kind of starting to explore what you already know, right?
That's right. Usually, what instigates an analysis like this is, hey, we just got an audit, or we there was just a finding. We just talked to, somebody outside of the organization that said, hey, we need to focus on this specific segment. So at that point, what I've done is I've added the low to moderate income census tracts on top of all of the census tracts. But in fact, at this point, we don't need all of the census tracts. We just need to identify the LMI census tracts. So here they are. Here are the LMI census tracts. And if I'm a lender, whether I am an IMB or a credit union or a bank, what I need to know is, well, how have we been serving this market? And I do that by adding our purchase originations. So now every circle that you see, this is for a lender, every circle that you see represents that lender's purchase originations year to date. And so you can see that they've been originating around the market. Okay. But the purpose or the value of seeing it on a map is being able to immediately identify, hey, we definitely have some loans that fall in the pink areas, but there are also a lot of loans that are falling outside of the pink areas. And so if an auditor came to me and said, "Hey, this there could be an issue," this is how part of the tool that you use to identify that, oh, well, this is maybe what they're talking about to make that crystallize to be able to recognize, okay, now I understand why they're saying there could be an issue, there could be a finding. So just visually, this speaks volume, right? Pictures speak more than words. What is the expression?
Yeah.
Pictures worth a thousand words. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
So, do you want to stop here for a second? Though, and I may bring the deck back up, but so this is a point where he did a great job showing that, whether it's, through, whatever the reason is, you have a signal and indicator that says, hey, you're not delivering here. And we'll just for the fun of it, Bernard, will say that this particular uh, gap was between a lender and the whole market, not a peer group, but we'll just use the whole market. And that difference was in what we would call the penetration rate. So you could be looking at gaps, like Bernard said, just based on, hey, we're losing market share. You could be looking at gaps simply visually by looking at, geographically, where aren't we? You could, look at so many different indicators. And just as an FYI, at the back of the deck that I'm going to give to you, we have a little goal setting toolkit that has a list of all of the different indicators and what they might mean. Didn't want to go through those one at a time with you today, but so you come to that particular spot, and so I mean, to freeze frame this, because this is sort of showing you the problem. And then we have the couple things we have to think about. And, you know what, I'm not going to go back to the deck. I'll just talk about it. A couple things you have to think about. You have to say, all right, now, if we're going to start improving on this, we need to figure out, we need to figure out what, we're going to do. So there's two pieces of that. If you have to think about what you're going to do to fix something, you have to figure out what's causing it. So that's where, a lot more digging into the comparison and the gaps we talked about before last week. Are we not performing because we have a product gap? Are we not performing because we don't have enough applications coming in? Are we not performing because we have fallout that's higher than the rest of the market? Whatever that reason is, if you're going to be making a decision and trying to see how you're doing moving forward, you need to set goals. And the point of setting a goal is to determine what success looks like and move backward from that. And so the first thing we're usually asked is, well, what metric should I set my goal around? Right? Because you could have a market share goal, you could have a number goal, you could have a penetration rate goal. All of those different things could get you somewhere. But the point of this, what works best usually is if you look at the complexity of that and you say, all right, simply saying, we need to do more LMI loans, that's not a goal. That's just a statement. But if you say, so that's too vague. But you could say, well, and Bernard, I'm going to have you kind of show the whole gap idea in a minute, but let's just talk through it. You can say, all right, well, I know, I'm going to use easy numbers here, that again, 10% of the market was LMI, and I had 5% LMI. Well, let's talk about what that would have looked like last year. So let's use a baseline and figure out, if I would have looked at the same thing last year, if I wanted to be just like the market, how many more loans should I have done? That right there is one of the pieces that we would call, that's a baseline metric. So since you're trying to, figure things out, in this particular case, you're going to be looking at a couple of metrics. You're going to want to be able to, one of your foundation metrics is going to be that penetration rate. So if you're using that to compare how well you're serving a part of a market, that's key. But the secondary piece of that is just knowing what your penetration rate needs to be, is, since that's a relative number, a relative metric, you also have to be able to turn around and say, oh, by the way, in order to take action on this, I need to know that having 10% of the market's 10% of our loans be LMI, you need to be able to say that equates to 100 loans, that equates to 50 loans. And that's the fun, or I guess the fun and complex thing about that is there's so many different pieces to that it's not straightforward. And so the right goal, in a sense, the right metric, depends on the problem you're trying to fix. So, and I'll just go through a few.
So
Application goal. Go ahead.
Laird, I was just gonna say, I think we have a question.
Okay.
So, Vince, you raised your hand. I don't know if you can come off mute. If you can't, just type your question in the chat, and we'll definitely get to it. But I just wanted to make sure that we recognize that you're
Yeah, for
raising
sure.
your hand. Okay. So, Laird, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I am gonna bring up this, my my deck again, just because I do think this part is interesting.
Yeah.
So, and Bernard, if you see Vince's question come through, stop me. Um,
Yep.
so it depends on the problem you're going to fix. Application goals when you're talking about demand. Choose this when you're not seeing enough activity from a borrower group or a geography. Originations is when you're looking at that closed loan production problem. Share goal is when you're looking at bridging a competitive gap. Penetration rate goal, and that's what we're talking about here, is when the problem is alignment. So there's all these different things and different pieces that even if you're trying to fix that one goal, that one problem, which is, hey, our penetration rate was too low, you're going to have sub metrics like what's our application goal? What's our origination goal? What did we have to do with pull through? What is our goal for denial rate? To get to that final piece, you're going to be actually thinking about a whole bunch of other goals. And so we call those kind of like primary and secondary goals. And working through that at the beginning is a part of this process. And this is not meant to be simple. This is very complicated in some ways. But if you take the time at the beginning to start thinking through, here's our problem, what's causing it, and what are our strategies, that takes time. But once you have it in place, that's when it becomes much easier. So, so that is usually, going back to that first set of questions here. How do you choose the right goal metric? Well, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. And Bernard, you also brought up another a point here, which is, well, should our goals be people or place based? Well, that sounds kind of familiar with the whole SPCP thing, but basically you're saying, are we looking at how we're doing in a market? So what is our market share in Fulton County? Or do we care more about a borrower segment? Like, how are we doing with LMI borrowers in Fulton County? Those are two separate analyses. But the strongest opportunity, the strongest goals are the ones when you pull them together and you have a combined one. So an example of a geography-based goal, increase purchase applications in these five LMI tracks by 15%. A borrower-based, increase LMI borrower originations from 18 to 22%. The best of the two, increase LMI borrower application in majority minority tracks by 12% by making sure. And so by doing that, you're getting to the borrower base and the geography based goal at the same time. So you're pulling it together and you're looking at your priority segments that are also in priority geography. So if you know that you're trying to meet more LMI purchase borrowers, and you know that LMI purchase borrowers, the majority of them are in LMI tracks or MMCTs, by combining those two together, you are actually kind of touching on both of those goals. Does that make sense? Um, good. So again, we're gonna move past this in a second here, but so the next piece of that, it's like, okay, you have to figure out what the metric is, kind of what's the context. Is it geography? Is it segment? But we're basically saying it should be both. And then it's going back to that, how specific should we be? You need goals specific enough to act. And not only that, you need goals that are specific enough that you can evaluate whether you're moving forward. So, not meaningful, increasing lending. Better, increase purchase applications by 15% over 12 months. And then the best is when you start saying, hey, I want to increase purchase application originations in the 5 highest tracks by 10 to 15% over the next year. And what this doesn't say is that equates to we need to add about 45 new loans in order to do that, based on our baseline and based on our forecast. So can you, Bernard, do you have another way to kind of show that on the map? How that looks, or I know you had the scorecard up, maybe showing that from the scorecard perspective gives another look at what I'm saying, if you want to show that market scorecard that you had.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to share again. So here is an example where we were just saying, hey, here's a growth goal, right? This was for ABC Mortgage. And so these are 2025 actuals. So here was their total originations and then broken out by different borrower segments. In this case, it happens to be race, but as Laird mentioned, it could be by borrower income in low to moderate, right? Or it could be even by loan type if you're looking to increase your FHA share. So this is just an example, but the concept is the same. So we had 589 total loans. That represents our total originations. 12 of those loans were to Asian borrowers, or 2% of our loans. 55 to African American, or 9.3% of our loans, and 146 to Hispanic, or 24.8. So these were our actual penetration rates. But this is what the market did. Okay, so this is every other lender, and this is their penetration rates. So we were at 2% with Asian, the market was at 8.1%. We were at 9.3, the market's at 17.8. We were at 24.8, the market's at 20.8. So in fact, if you compare these numbers directly, you can see, hey, we are under indexed with Asian, with African American, but we are over indexed with Hispanic in this specific example. So if you wanted to be on par with the market, this is what we're talking about. We're saying, hey, instead of having 2% be your total originations to Asian borrowers, you should have been at 8.1%. And what does that look like? It roughly looks at like 48 loans. So to be on par with the market, this lender should have been at roughly 48 loans originated to Asian borrowers. That puts them at parity at 8%. And then it's the same concept at parity with African American and Hispanic. But now there's even one step further. If this specific company wanted to be best in class with these specific lenders, we would look at these penetration numbers. And you can see that all of these numbers are actually higher. Why? Because these numbers put ABC Mortgage within the top quartile of all lenders in the market. So, what does that mean? It means that if you wanted to be in the top 25% of all lenders with respect to Asian borrowers, you needed or you should have originated 8.7% of all your loans to Asian borrowers. You should have originated 23% of all your loans to African American borrowers. You should have originated 29.2% of all your loans to Hispanic borrowers. That is, again, almost like a stretch goal, a reaching for, hey, we don't just want to be equal with the market. We want to go above. We want to be in the top group with respect to these segments. So, what do these percentages actually represent? How can we quantify these percentages? What does that mean? It means that if we had been at 8.7% penetration rate with Asian, instead of originating 12, we should have been originating 52. And the difference between the 52 and the 12 here is this 40 loans. So we should be at plus 40. For African American, we were at 55. To be in the top quartile, we should have been at 136 or an additional 81 loans. And then with Hispanic, we were at 146. We needed to be at 173. That's an additional 27 loans. So you can see something like if I look at the Hispanic goal of originating an additional 27 units to Hispanic borrowers, that represents a growth of 18% within the segment. It's a lot, but it's achievable. Something like this, where it's triple digit growth, from one year to the next is very difficult over a 12-month period. Which is why when you're setting these goals, it's how realistic are they? Because you're not, if nothing changes, if you don't hire any new LOs and you go from a goal of, hey, we're going to do 12 Asian loans to we're going to do 52 Asian loans, that's a massive jump, a massive jump. And so something else has to change. The either the goal needs to be lowered and to be more reasonable, or you need to make major changes in your operations, including in your recruiting, in order to meet a stretch goal like this. But the concept again is the same of this is how you would set your goals no matter the segment and figure out, hey, are these goals realistic given my market, given my resources, and what I have at my disposal as a company in order to execute.
So what you're showing here right now, and this is you did this way better than I could have, which was basically you're giving a baseline, right?
Yeah.
You're giving context for here's where we're coming from, and I love that you brought up the fact that okay, you're touching on a goal here when you're talking about the stretch and what's practical, what's reasonable. This goal is to be in the top 25% in your markets. So now we have a new complication, and this is the part that I don't know if you have in this workbook or not. But moving forward, you want to be that, what parity is. How do you turn it into a goal? And as you and I both know, because we work so much with the forecast, what do you do when you have to make a projection about where you want to be, knowing that there are all these moving parts? Like, how do you make um, a future projection about how much you need? Saying I'd say this is a loan penetration rate. This is a number, but it's coming from a penetration rate as opposed to a market share. Give us a scenario here where this market is actually moving very quickly in, let's say this is 2025 into 2027. How do you and what do you recommend lenders do to mitigate for the shifts in the market that are to come that are going to change the penetration rate, change who's number five, and change all those things? How do you what's your advice for that?
So I think that's critical. You start with goals, but you don't start with goals in a vacuum. You need to understand the market itself. We always talk, it seems like traditionally in the mortgage industry, it's just been, hey, do what you did last year plus 10% in a vacuum. And that doesn't work. Why? Because if the market is moving faster than 10%, then you're actually going to lose share if you just do 10%. If the market is moving more slowly than 10%, you're setting your LOs up for failure because there's no way they're going to reach 10% in this type of environment. So that's why we start with, hey, how quickly is the market growing? So if we come back to this example and we say, okay, well, the market is growing, 10%, assuming, again, a big assumption, but assuming the growth is proportionate to each segment, meaning that each segment is also growing 10%, then you can see that even these stretch goals of plus 18%, plus 147, and plus 333, those are likely not going to happen. We can't grow this segment by 18% if it's growing 10%. Again, without major changes, without, maybe adding 3 LOs in the specific market or 5 LOs, whatever the numbers dictate. So starting with the market and the forecast and the projections there will dictate what is a realistic goal, what is a stretch goal given the environment, and then how can we execute under current circumstances, meaning how many LOs do we currently have versus, okay, what can we attain if we brought in another LO, another 2 LOs, and so on.
That's a great brings up a great that's a way to contrast. So sometimes, and a lot of the cases, you're what you're basically saying is, hey, this is what we need. Now we're going to go back and figure out um, how many people we need to hit that goal. The flip side of that is, and I can say that when you're dealing like, and this is and just to be clear, like we're looking at this is through the ASOL program that we do with NAMBA. It's specific to social impact lending. This could be, we could be looking at the exact same data. Instead of having it be by segment, we could be looking at 5 different MSAs for total opportunity. So it doesn't matter what we're looking at, the same concept is there. And depending on if it's a hard goal I have to hit or it's just something we want to do, share goals tend to be something we want to do. Harder goals are saying, hey, if we don't do this, then we're going to end up buying CRA loans in October at 3 times the price. So this is kind of a have to, we have to hit this. And then that's one way to do it. And the other way is to say, hey, we have to hit this goal now that we have this goal, because again, it's not negotiable. We're going to have to go back and we're going to do that right sizing of resources based on what we know to be true, or at least, what we think to be true. And so interestingly, this is where, again, I don't want us to keep going back and forth, but when we're talking about resources, notice that both of us mentioned people first. That's a really important resource, and that's who we think of. And most of the time, when we're talking about right sizing, all of us in this industry think about hiring. But in reality, and again, I hope that you take the time to read this checklist in this toolkit. There's a lot of things you're looking at. One of the resources you have to say, it's not just about people resources, it's do we have the right product? Do we have the right relationships? Do we have the right, credit box? So serving and resources don't always have to be quantified in terms of people. Granted, that's how we think about it most of the time. But in reality, it could be that you don't need new people. You just need a different product for those people to take to the market. Is that, Bernard, you see that all the time. So the goal you set and the resources you need depend a lot on what you learned from what we talked about last week, which is what exactly is your gap and why is it there? Because you need different things for different reasons. Almost across the board, though, if you're going into a new market and you want to basically increase and get more, high level overview demand, that's a people issue. But if you're trying to do a little bit better job in a particular place, reaching a different segment, that's when you have to ask yourself, do we have the right people to reach that segment? And do we have the right resources, products, pricing and marketing to reach that segment? And that's the big difference when you're looking at geography versus, being more nuanced when you're looking at, that penetration rate and how well you're doing.
And
But
Laird, here's an anecdote just about that.
sure.
Specifically, I've worked with clients who say, "Hey, we want to compete with some of the builders in our markets,"
Yep.
and it's like, all right, fantastic. Let's take a look at who the top builders are, and then we take a look at the top builders, and then we say, okay, well, based on this, what product do you have that can compete with what some of these builders are offering? And then a lot of the time, I see kind of the blank stare of, ugh, we don't necessarily have something specific. Well, the builders, in this example, are attracting customers because they are offering so much, right? They're offering down payments or assistance, or they're offering, all appliances included, whatever it is in the loan to make it attractive. If you don't have something to compete, then you don't have business competing there, meaning there's nothing you can
Right.
do without the proper program or product in order to be effective and get some business.
See, that right there, you said something really critical. So basically, what you say, and this is because I know you're working with people on this, you basically say to them that opportunity isn't right for you. And guess what? That is okay. It's one of the smartest choices a lender can make, not just to know what opportunity is right, but to know what opportunities aren't right. It brings up another point, it was very interesting. And again, I don't know if you have some zone areas built to show what that looks like. Just recently, I've been working with a lender in a market, and they're trying to really understand. They're top lender in the market, but they're trying to understand their LMI borrower and LMI tract penetration rates. Because let's say, for example, I'll give you an indicator. They are, let's say, number 5 in the market overall and number 20 with LMIB. Problem, I can tell you right now that when you see that, like for me, I see that, I'm like, okay, we have to investigate more. So most of the time we think investigating more means we're just going to look more at the product. We're going to look more at, okay, what's our denial rate look like? Is this pull through? The answer is not pull through in this particular case. They have a higher pull through than the market. Okay. So then we look a little bit deeper, I mean, at least from a denial perspective. And then we see, oh, still we have a lower, everything is lower, fallout is lower. And so we looked a little bit closer at applications and we started seeing that the applications were looking pretty different. And where the reason they had a lower denial rate, which in some ways we can say that's great, but the reason for this lower denial rate and this lower fallout rate is they were in a way self-selecting before they even got to the application process. And it came about because there wasn't a standardized process for intake. So what one LO heard and another LO heard, and what they said to the borrower, maybe even stop that transaction from happening. Like that initial contact sent them in a different direction. So that was one thing we were able to understand, and that has a whole different set of solutions. The other thing, though, is interesting again, and again, and I like to use Atlanta because we see it so often in Atlanta. If you see that market share problem in Fulton and you dig in and you're like, oh, I can't believe, overall, I thought we were doing well, but then you specifically have this segment problem with a particular market segment in the really, really pocketed, segregated both income and racial and ethnic neighborhoods. You can really start saying that, we don't have a Fulton County problem. We have this particular part of Fulton County problem. And Atlanta wasn't the market that I was working with this lender in, but we went through and I took this one county, broke it into 10 different markets. There were 3 of the top markets, like we kind of scored and ranked which were the most important of the submarkets. The 3 top submarkets for LMI lending, that lender had under 1% share, even though in the market, they had 6% share. So that tells me right there, that's a situation where that understanding, the way we dug into it, showed a person gap. So we had to come up with goals for person, but then a geographic gap. And by solving both, they start by looking at both with solutions and goals for both, they can solve it at the same time. And that's something I encourage to any of you who are specifically, if you're working from a CRA perspective or fair lending work, really dig into the wheres. Don't necessarily dig into only a census tract, but start looking at community level, because you'll find a lot of times it's just you may, for whatever reason, even when it's around your branch, you're not connecting with a certain section, a certain neighborhood in one of these larger counties. And that by not connecting in that neighborhood where it's high opportunity, you're basically setting yourself up, and it's not going to be possible to hit the goals you want if you don't make, changes there. And that, I think personally, that's probably the biggest thing we see, that when you put those dots on the map, like Bernard just showed, most people have an aha. I very rarely have lenders who say, oh yeah, I knew that's how it was going to look. Most of the time they're like, wait, that can't be right. Wait, our branch is there. There's nothing around there. That gives you something to go back and start asking questions about. And I'm thinking about the crazy answers we've heard. But 6 years ago, one of the answers that we heard from that was, there's no good parking at that branch. Who would have thought of that? But that branch that was meant to serve that market wasn't getting people into to the office because the parking was so bad. So
So let's talk about that in the context of Atlanta. So right now, what you're seeing is I still have isolated the low to moderate income census tracts. So all of these are LMI. But now what I've done is instead of making them pink, I've made them multicolor. And to go back to the forecasting that we saw, blue, less opportunity, red, more opportunity. So there is a differentiation among LMI census tracts even. Again, even a bank or even a ABC mortgage like this wouldn't necessarily have all of the resources needed to cover every single one of these census tracts. So therefore, what we would do in this situation is here are the LMI census tracts. Here are where I have been as ABC Mortgage, where I have been originating, and you can see around here. And then actually I can add my branches. And this it could be, this is an example of a branch network where every star represents a branch, right? So here is something clear to me, which is I have these two branches to the south right here, but I don't necessarily, and I'm going to hide the branches just for a sec. I don't necessarily have the loans in this area, even though there is a pocket. If there's a neighborhood here where I see red, orange, yellow, a lot of opportunity in LMI specifically, and I haven't been originating here. Yep, I have two loans, but
No branches.
there is absolutely more business to be had in this area. And so what can we do with this concept? Well, we can what I can do is I can make a copy. I'm going to make a quick copy of this top layer, and I'm going to create my own market, my own submarket to say, hey, this area, these LMI census tracts are the ones that really interest me. And now I'm going to show you what that looks like um, right here. So where did I put it? Oh, I removed it. Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, where did it go? Okay, let me reset that. Let me try that again and select it instead. Okay, so very quickly. So what is happening is I'm telling the system, hey, I want to create a new submarket. And this is what my submarket looks like. It's not all of Atlanta. It's not even a single county. It's this cluster of census tracts that represent LMI opportunity specifically. And again, if I put my originations on, you can see we just
Oh,
have those two. So
yeah.
so okay, so now the question is great. Well, what is my opportunity in this custom market? And I can view my custom market, and I can say, hey, we are specifically looking at these census tracts, and I can add. Let me just change the timing. We can go from 2025 through 2027 right here. And when I do that, we are going to get an actual. So there were 1,300 loans in that market last year. We are forecasting an uptick of 1,339 this year, and or this is our estimate, and then a forecast in 2027 of 1,370. So is it growing by leaps and bounds? No, but it is growing. That is key. It is growing, and it's LMI. So now I have some numbers against which to say, how much of this do I want? What is the share I want in this specific area if I'm going to be focusing my finite resources to get more LMI business? What is realistic? How much can I grab? And then figuring out, okay, well, how many LOs are currently covering this area? And so on. And Laird can fill out
But
the
I want you to do something else for me, Bernard. I
okay.
want you to go to that market and use the drop down and tell me, like, let's look at a let's look at a competitor report there. Because
Okay.
not just one track, but the whole thing, because then you can start saying, okay, well, what's the I don't think you even have to do that. I think you can just go right to the drop down on the side of the market.
Well,
Um,
here I'm gonna save it just because I like to do that. Okay,
um,
so now I click on a specific census tract. Oh, let me get out
but
of this.
you can do the whole market from from the left hand side, I think. Well,
Well,
um,
here's what we're talking about. So I just called that market from gaps to
uh,
growth,
gotcha. Okay,
and
gotcha.
now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, hey, in the last 12 months in this market, who have been the top lenders? And now I can figure out, oh, well,
Uh,
these are my competitors.
yep.
Rocket has done 408,000 units in the US, but they've done 112 in this specific
Mm,
area that I've identified. Okay, fine. Well, I'm not competing directly with market. Okay, well, New American Funding is the big IMB doing a lot of business. Obviously, United Wholesale is up there. Okay, here's another IMB, Guild. And now here's a bank. So depending on what I am as ABC Mortgage, whether a bank, IMB, credit union, these are my competitors in this area that are fighting for my LMI share. The question is, can I compete with these folks? If I cannot, then it's moot. It's move on. It's game over. It's don't waste your time. Don't waste your resources. But if you look at this and you say, as ABC lender, yeah, of course I can compete with these folks. I have better products. I have better programs. Okay, great.
yeah.
Now that you know that, now it's okay. We know the competitive landscape. Now let's talk about who is actually doing the business there, and then we can start
Yeah,
doing things like who are the top loan officers in this
in that
area.
same, yeah.
And now I can see, all right,
Uh,
here's Michaeline with DHI, so a lot of builder. Here's New American Funding, Community Credit Union.
yeah.
Okay, so these are the folks that I need to start connecting with. And I can do the exact same thing on the agent side. Who are the agents who are actually listing properties in this area, in this neighborhood, in this LMI uh, market?
And we digressed a little bit here, but it's important to understand this whole process because when you're setting your goals, you have to be thinking about, okay, how could we be doing this? And one of the things that we didn't show in this is one of the reasons that when I bring in the competitor data, I also want to see what are they using, right? So if we had gone to one of their profiles, we know that if you're looking at IMBs and you're looking at banks, you're going to see a difference breakout between Govy and non-government. Like, it's just going to look different. And so if you're not willing to do a certain type of product, then you either need something that handles that, that looks like that product but isn't. So if you need something that has elements of an FHA loan, then or would work well for the people who need an FHA loan, then you don't need an FHA loan. But you can start looking at what you might need, and those are resources too. If we were looking at this from a let's say a race and ethnicity standpoint, and we saw we were in an area where we knew that 60% of the households were Spanish speaking, well, rather than just saying, hey, we need another LO, we need to say, hey, we need an LO that speaks Spanish. We need an L, if we look at this and we dive in and we realize this isn't, it's a certain percent Asian, but not just that it's, hey, 100% or 80% of the Asians in this particular market are Chinese. Do we have someone who can work with the Chinese, culture and speak Chinese, or whatever the language that you're talking about is? That's important. But sometimes it may just be that you have the right product, you have the right people, and what you need to do to get to the number you want is just tell them they need to do more of something. And I'm going to be like, in my experience, that actually is the number one thing, especially when you're talking about LMI. You don't need to go out and hire a bunch of people. You need to work a little bit on your relationships and your community outreach. But what you really need to do is quantify. You need to plan and say, hey, I know where we can go, but you 10 people, especially if you've got like people in the, your middle producers who do almost enough, but not enough, give them a specific place. Say, hey, see this market here, see this community. I want 4 loans out of you in the next quarter, or you need to get 4 loans in the next quarter. You start giving specific goals like that, you'd be shocked at how much more quickly people can reach them when you specify a number. And that happens because at the end of the day, everybody wants to know what they need to do to be successful. And yes, LOs want as many loans as they can get. But when you tell them exactly where to go, what type you're looking for, sometimes that's how you build those segments up without spending a dime in hiring and firing and all of that. Or having to go to, bring another product into the mix. But
So,
all
so
of that,
Laird,
but one quick thing, all of that though is as you're looking ahead, you can choose to be aggressive. You can choose to be conservative. You can say, hey, we only want to be, you just don't want to lose any share. The number you pick for that tells you what you need to do. If you do really want to be aggressive and double your share, you better hire people. So that's what that one picture was all about. It's that the goal, the opportunity and the resources that you have or want, you keep going back and forth until you get that magic mix. Sorry, I get very excited about this if you can't tell. Bernard, you better take
so,
over before I go
so
crazy.
Laird, we have a couple minutes remaining. We've come to the end of today's journey.
You didn't even get
Let's
halfway
land
through
this
it.
plane. What would you like to have the folks, the good people, take away?
Um, you know, the good people should take away the fact that we only got a quarter through. No, this is fascinating stuff. The takeaways that let me see if I have a good takeaway slide. I think I do. I have a do and don't slide. Those are always good. I don't want there to, the reality of this is not supposed to be easy to do. It takes months. One of our larger clients were helping do their CRA LMI lending for their home market. We've been doing it for 3 months. But number one, it's extremely important for growth. It keeps your expenses down, and it's really the job of a leader to do that. And not doing that is going to give you problems that you can't um, make up for. And just doing what you've always done, just doing 10% more than last year, 5% more than last year, is going to be an exercise in the same problem over and over again. So I suggest to everybody, I really hope that everyone can keep learning more about this. I could talk about this forever. I am going to provide access. We're putting together a whole gaps to growth toolkit that will really have a lot of little, like the actual worksheets, the stuff that we just mentioned, you can actually quantify. You can say, okay, this is the metric you see. This is what it means. Because sometimes it's just about that. Am I sharing my screen, Bernard?
Yes, you are.
Okay, well, and that's, just like pop to the end and just give you an example of how much there's that you can actually know. Like there's a lot of different indicators. And what does it mean? This is helpful stuff. But the fact that there's so much to it means it's not something that's a one and done kind of thing. And I hope people don't shy away from that because doing it the first year is the hardest. But when you stay with it, it really is your path to more market share, to widening the pie, to better, results from a regulatory standpoint, people sticking around. I mean, LOs that are doing well don't leave you if they have enough opportunity, if enough support. So much can be saved. Profitability, revenue, and closing the home ownership gap. It's a win-win-win on every level when you take the time to do this. And,
Outstanding.
and
Well,
if
I think
anyone else wants to stay on and have any questions, I don't have anything to do. So you're welcome to stay on. You can go. I don't care. I know this is a
I
smaller
will
group than usual. So I'm
I will
happy to
plug.
answer any questions.
Well, again, every attendee here, thank you very much for your time. July 22nd is our next installment, episode 4. So absolutely be on the lookout for that. We really appreciate your time.
Which is
Thank
that
you.
topic, Bernard? That's one of the more common topics, isn't it? Like, isn't it agent work, recruiting? It's something that Like usually has a little, the people like better than this because it's a little bit more straightforward.
Well,
But
great. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
and I am going to send out those checklists with this deck. So there you go. All
All
right.
right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. I don't know how to get off.